Hey friends, Ash here. Welcome back to Gents. It's time to check out the top 10 best-selling men's fragrances in the United States for last year. So if you haven't seen part 1 or part 2, check those videos out first. That's where I go over number 30 through number 11, broken up into 2 separate videos. Today is the top 10. The best sellers, the fragrances that made the most money, the best-selling men's fragrances in the US for 2023. As always, I'll have all these fragrances that I talk about here today linked in the description. Feel free to check them out down there. Let's kick it off with number 10. Number 10 is from Giorgio Armani. It is Armani Code. Now, in terms of value, this one is number 10, and in terms of volume, number 11. Just like in the previous videos, I'm gonna give you the rankings both for value and volume. So volume is the number of actual units sold, and value is the overall dollar value. So as you'll see coming up, you could have a fragrance that has really low volume, but makes up for it in terms of price of the fragrance itself, so their value is higher. And you could also have vice versa, something that sells a whole bunch of units, but then each fragrance that's sold isn't worth quite as much, so the value is not quite as high. This one though, pretty even, 10 and 11. The overall dollar value for this one, $25.97 million. And just like the previous videos, this is for quarter 1 through the end of quarter 3. So quarter 4 performance is not included, and that's because I'm filming this toward the beginning of January 2024. So that information is not available yet, but if it becomes available in the future, I'll do an updated video to let you know how things changed with quarter 4 factored in. But through the first 3 quarters, that's how much this one made, and it placed at number 10 overall in terms of best-selling men's fragrances. And Armani Code was 1.75% of the market share for men's fragrances through the first 3 quarters, which was actually an increase year over year. So if nothing else, it would seem that this rebottling, this different bottle style, actually is improving sales. And I want to complain for just half a second here. Is it just me, or are a lot of Armani's releases having issues with leakage? It seems like since they've started going to these bottles that are supposed to be refillable, that almost all of them leak, at least the ones that I've purchased. So while I love Giorgio Armani, I love a lot of the fragrances that they've done, they've got to figure that out, because this one leaks, my new Armani Acqua di Gio Parfum leaks, a number of others that have been coming out over the past couple of years have leaked. And it's all of them. It's not just one of them, so it can't just be me. I know there are a lot of you out there that have purchased Armani fragrances that are just losing a bunch of them or losing a bunch of the fragrance due to leakage. So Armani, figure it out. Number 9 is none other than Creed Aventus. Remember what I was telling you about volume versus value? Yeah, this one is number 9 in terms of value, but in terms of volume, 57th. So that means 56 other men's fragrances out there sold more units through the first 3 quarters of the year, but because of how much this one costs, it's number 9 in terms of overall sales. But honestly, considering how much Aventus does cost, the fact that it's 57th is pretty impressive. This one right at 26.8 million through the first 3 quarters. And if you followed along with the first 2 parts of this, you know that this is the only niche fragrance that has popped up, and it's gonna be the only one that does pop up as far as best-selling men's fragrances. So yeah, you could pretty comfortably say, I guess, that Aventus is still the king of men's niche scents. Interestingly enough though, while this did make up 1.81% of the overall men's fragrance market, it actually dropped year over year in terms of sales, or in terms of the percentage of the market that this encapsulates. And how much did it drop? 0.26%. So not inconsequential. Still though, as I said, as far as niche fragrances goes, Aventus obviously the king as far as men's sales. Number 8 could be a little bit of a surprise for some of you guys out there. It's Burberry Hero, specifically the Eau de Parfum, and this one had a volume of 9th. So volume 9th, value 8th. Again, really, really good to have it like that, kind of like Code. It means it's moving a lot of bottles at a pretty good price and doing really, really well. So this one is at 28.48 million. So yeah, Hero above all the other ones that we've covered in the previous couple videos and these over here. This one's at 1.92% of the overall market share for men's fragrances, which is actually up 0.55% year over year. So Hero is actually crushing it. I mean, top 10 fragrance here. And Burberry needed that because Mr. Burberry had a lot of fanfare. That came out, didn't do so hot. The flankers came out, didn't really move the needle that much, but Hero is getting it done. Now, one thing I wanna highlight here really quickly is that Burberry Hero is number 8 and the eau de parfum was highlighted. But I do feel like that for most lines, the way that they report sales numbers is for all the concentrations put together. Now, what I mean by that is if you have a fragrance line and it has eau de toilette, eau de parfum, parfum, that they'll take those and kind of put it together and then count that as whatever. So Burberry Hero, for example, eau de toilette, eau de parfum, right? They won't differentiate. They'll just say Burberry Hero, and that's the eau de toilette and the eau de parfum. And you'll see that come up again here in a little bit with some other fragrances. But if there is a separate naming convention, okay? So if there was, say, Burberry Hero Intense, that would be counted as its own separate thing. So there we go. Burberry Hero, number 8. What is number 7? Next fragrance up is Sauvage Elixir, number 7 in terms of value, 18th in terms of volume, which makes sense because of course Sauvage Elixir are pretty expensive. So you would expect the volume on that to be a bit lower than a bunch of other fragrances because it is just so much pricier than a bunch of the other fragrances. But frankly, 18th, pretty good, I gotta say. 29.71 million is the sales number for Dior Sauvage year over year. Do you think it increased, decreased? Increased, very slightly. It's at 2% of the market share, which is up 0.06% year over year, which means that it's pretty consistent, pretty strong in that number. I would think this is probably gonna be a top 10 fragrance for a little while based off those numbers. And what can I say? I love Sauvage Elixir. I think it's great, awesome release, great quality, good performance, compliment puller. I mean, number 6, Gucci Guilty, the original Gucci Guilty Homme. So Gucci Guilty Black also in the top 30 and Gucci Guilty in the top 10. This is a really successful fragrance line, at least for those 2 releases in it. Number 6th in terms of value, number 10 in terms of volume. So still selling quite well and selling for a pretty good price point. 30.39 million is the number for this one. And actually year over year, a decent drop off in terms of the percentage of the overall market share that this has. 2.05% is the amount that this occupies, which is actually down about 0.4% year over year. So decently substantial, millions of dollars. But again, these numbers don't include the 4th quarter, so it made even more overall for the entire year than what I just presented to you there. But Gucci Guilty is still doing extremely well, just outside the top 5. All right, we're into the top 5 now. These should be fragrances that you fully expect. You should know every single one of these. None of these should be a surprise. And actually, as we work through this top 5, I will tell you all 5 of these are in the top 5 of volume as well. So all 5 are in the top in terms of value and volume. Number 5 is number 5 both in value and volume, and it is Eros from Versace. And you're gonna see a decent jump from here to there in terms of sales numbers, 42.9 million for Eros. That is 2.89% of the overall market share, and that is up year over year by about 0.2%. So Eros actually having a better, or had a better rather, 2023 than 2022, which is really interesting because there was not anything new really in the Eros line. It's just word of mouth, people that bought it before that are buying it again, stuff like that. Really successful, and Eros number 5. It's interesting because Versace Man Eau Fraiche was number 12 in terms of volume, but it was down in the you know, the lower part of the top 30 because they don't sell for as much. But then Eros, top 5. Either way, Versace's moving a lot of bottles of those 2 fragrances. Let's go to number 4. So number 4 is actually number 3 in volume. So number 3 in volume, number 4 in value. It is Acqua di Gio from Giorgio Armani. Thankfully, my bottle doesn't leak of this one. Legitimately, I think I've lost like 25 milliliters from my bottle of Code due to leakage. This one made $51.14 million in the first 3 quarters of the year. And in terms of its overall market share, pretty flat. I mean, technically it was down a little bit year over year, but kind of within that, you know, expected margin, you know, your typical fluctuations. So this one still standing pat, not really dropping all that much at all. And that is 3.45% of the overall market share. So 3.45% of every dollar spent in the men's fragrance world was going toward this, basically. We are in the top 3. And again, this top 3 should be pretty obvious. Number 3 in terms of value is number 4 in terms of volume, YSL Y. This is the Eau de Parfum. $57.82 million is what Y pulled in, and that was 3.9% of the overall market share, which was actually up year over year, about 0.21%. So a nice little increase there. So YSL kind of sitting pretty as far as their fragrance releases. They've got Y doing really well, Myself just crushing it when that came out, and then L'Homme still doing quite well also. Now, I want to bring one thing up here really quickly. Earlier on, I think it was in part 2, there was Y Le Parfum. That was 17th, so yeah, it was part 2. And that one obviously is part of the Y line, right? But I believe that the way that brands report their sales numbers is the eau de toilette, the eau de parfum, and if they have it, the parfum, they put together. But if it has any other naming convention, so Le Parfum, or Intense, or Absolute, Profundo, Profumo, something like that, then they will present it as something different, like a completely different fragrance, which is why you'll see YSL Y Le Parfum come in at 17th, not included as part of this. But then YSL Y, they just present as YSL Y. But I believe, again, those numbers are everything put together. The eau de toilette, the eau de parfum, and there's not a parfum here, there's a Le Parfum, but that's broken out separately, again, because of the weird way they do this. So yeah, keep that in mind. And that would apply to some of these down here. So Eros Flame would be its own thing if it was top 30. It's not. But Eros is just presented as Eros, right? But that includes both the eau de toilette, the eau de parfum, and the parfum. Same thing for all the fragrances that we have talked about. So just keep that in mind. Is that more confusing than it needs to be? Yes, but I think the reason they do that is because if you broke everything out and you just had, you know, Eros eau de toilette, eau de parfum, parfum, blah, 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 right? Then at that point, your top 30 sales numbers would just look like probably a smashed up bunch of the same lines over and over and over and over again. And so this helps keep everything kind of a little bit cleaner, and you can see where each line is at, what each line is doing. And then the flankers are considered their own spin-off, essentially. Hopefully that makes sense to you. But why? Number 3, we are to the top 2, the big boys. The really, 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 really big boys. Number 2 is both 2 in value and volume, Bleu de Chanel. 120.85 million for Bleu de Chanel. So pretty big jump right there. Just like, oh, yeah, those are big numbers. So that was 8.14% of the overall market share, but actually, even though those numbers are huge compared to pretty much everything else, it is down year over year, and a pretty good amount. 1.25% of the overall market share is how much it dropped year over year. Now, I don't think Bleu de Chanel is going anywhere. I think all of us agree, right? Bleu de Chanel, it's safe, it's completely fine, it's doing okay. But it is interesting to see that dropping. And it will be interesting to see if it continues to drop through this year, which obviously we won't have any idea until next year. It'll be a while, but something to keep an eye on. If maybe, you know, the blue fragrance craze is kind of slowing down a bit. I think these numbers reflect that, especially when you look at the whole top 30 and everything that's in there. There's, you know, a lot of blue fragrances that you may think are doing huge numbers that aren't in the top 30, at least again in the US. So Bleu de Chanel, number 2. Now, before we go to number 1, which probably not a surprise what that is, a couple of interesting things. First off, Jean Paul Gaultier. No fragrances in the top 30. Not the original Le Male, not Le Male de Parfum, not Elixir, no Scandal, nothing. As far as men's fragrance sales in the United States goes, not a fragrance in the top 30. Some other houses that were not in the top 30, Bulgari, no fragrances. Viktor and Rolf, no Spice Bombs here in the top 30. No Givenchy fragrances in the top 30, so none of the Gentlemen's. Ralph's Club, not in the top 30. The Polo fragrances had some show up, but no Ralph's Club. And no Hugo Boss, so Boss Bottled or the Scent. Neither of those in here either. So it's again, one of those things where you will see these big fragrance houses, and I'm not saying they're not selling, okay? I'm not saying that they're not making money or anything like that. It's just sometimes you may think just based off the name of the house or how well the fragrance is accepted, or how amazing it smells, you may think, oh, well, this has got to be just absolutely killing it in sales, but that may not be so. And that's one of the things sometimes that will get people confused when it comes to discontinuations, where a fragrance will be discontinued and people will be like, how is this possible? You know, everybody loves it, critically acclaimed, talked about all the time online, so it's got to be killing it as far as sales goes, but it may not be. You know, the general public may not really dig that one for whatever reason. And if the sales numbers aren't there, you know, all these companies ultimately are trying to make money. So if they're not making money on it, they're going to eventually be like, okay, we'll cut our losses, discontinue that, come out with something new. And discontinuations suck. Nobody likes to see a loved fragrance but this is part of why, if the sales numbers aren't there. All right, number 1, big surprise, Dior Sauvage. Number 1 in terms of volume, number 1 in terms of sales. So you have both Sauvage and Sauvage Elixir in the top 10, which means just overall Sauvage is really killing it. Because if you wanted to, you could take the near 30 million that Sauvage Elixir pulled in the first 3 quarters and throw that in to here if you wanted to call it just the Sauvage line overall, right? 122.67 million for Sauvage, so a couple million above Bleu de Chanel. If you throw in Sauvage Elixir, obviously a bigger gap at that point, but we don't have a Bleu de Chanel Elixir. Chanel, where's it at? 8.27%, the overall market share for Sauvage. But that is down. That is down year over year. 2.03% down. So that's pretty decent. It was at the same time in 2022, 10.3%. That is insane. That over 10% of the men's fragrance market was Sauvage. But that has dropped, as I said, a little over 2%. So again, like I was talking about with Bleu de Chanel, we'll see how that goes year over year. Maybe it bumps right back up. Maybe it shoots right back up this year and, you know, goes back to where it was before. But if it drops another like 2% or 1% or something, I don't know. At that point, maybe you start looking around and just kind of taking a look at the landscape of fragrances and see, well, what's coming next? Because year over year, the overall men's fragrance market in terms of value was up over 9%. So overall, everything is up. But these two, the titans of men's fragrances, were both down. Again, could be nothing, could bounce right back, but worth keeping an eye on. So there we go. That is the top 30 best-selling men's fragrances in the US with numbers and volume rankings as well through the first 3 quarters of 2023. If I get those numbers for 2024, like I said a bunch of times, I'll do an updated video. If not, I will see you next year with the numbers for this year. If you've got any predictions, leave them in the comments. Let us know what you think is gonna happen in terms of sales numbers for these fragrances and any other new ones. And thank you for hanging with me. Stay safe out there. I'll see you tomorrow with another fragrance video. See you guys later.